Hello and a happy Friday to you all. You're watching our afternoon edition of Arirang News, coming to you live from Seoul. It's good to have you with us. I'm Kwon Jang-ho. Like a turkey in the stove, the process to denuclearize North Korea cannot be rushed. That's what President Donald Trump said at a rally on Thursday. A fair point perhaps, but it runs counter to his remarks after the summit with Kim Jong-un earlier this month, where he raised expectations by saying the process would start very quickly. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is finally set to hold follow-up talks with the North next week, according to reports. But he has also dampened expectations, saying there is no set timeline for the denuclearization process. We'll discuss why the Trump administration seems to be reining in those expectations with a guest a bit later. But first, let's catch up with the latest news updates by turning to Devin Whiting, who's waiting for us at the news center. Devin?
Hi, Jang-ho. Here in South Korea, United Nations Command and U.S. Forces Korea have a new headquarters. They'll be leaving the base they've used for decades in central Seoul and relocating to Camp Humphreys, south of the capital, in Pyeongtaek, Gyeonggi-do Province. Our Park Ji-wan was at the new headquarters opening ceremony this morning.
The UN Command and U.S. Forces Korea held a ceremony Friday morning to officially open their new headquarters at Camp Humphreys in Pyeongtaek, Gyeonggi-do Province, some 70 kilometers south of Seoul. Hundreds of key military officials, including South Korea's Defense Minister Song Young-moo and the commander of UN Command and U.S. Forces Korea, General Vincent Brooks, attended the ceremony.
The current turning point on the Korean Peninsula is a result of the ROK-US alliance, a win without fighting through overcoming lots of difficulties. In this new era, troops of the UN Command and U.S. Forces Korea stationed in Pyeongtaek will assume new missions to contribute to the peace and stability of the Korean Peninsula and the world as a stabilizing presence in Northeast Asia.
Today marks an historic milestone in the history of United Nations Command, which began in 1950, and in the history of the Republic of Korea-U.S. alliance. United Nations Command will continue to be the home for international commitments, with a mandate to restore peace and security in defense of the Republic of Korea. And U.S. Forces Korea will remain the living proof of the American commitment to the alliance.
General Brooks also expressed gratitude toward the South Korean government's financial contributions in building the complex.
Ladies and gentlemen, this was a project that cost nearly $10.8 billion to build over 10 years. And the Republic of Korea investment was over 90% of the costs. And for that 90%, the United States remains with you 100%.
South Korean President Moon Jae-in also sent a congratulatory message read out by his security aide Lee Sang-chul during the ceremony. In the message, President Moon stressed the ROK-US alliance has been the foundation of not only the peace and stability of the Korean Peninsula, but also the democratization and economic development of South Korea. And he hoped that the ROK-US alliance becomes a great alliance beyond the current military and comprehensive alliance. The new base covers over 14 square kilometers or some 3,560 acres. When complete, it will contain military facilities, schools, hospitals, and even golf courses. This is the largest overseas U.S. base in the world, currently accommodating some 23,000 people, including U.S. military officials and their families, and the base is expected to grow to some 43,000 people by 2022. With the relocation, the United Nations Command and U.S. Forces Korea are leaving Yongsan, their home for the past 6 decades, and plan to complete their move to Camp Humphreys by the end of this year. Meanwhile, the ROK-US Combined Forces Command will relocate to a building inside South Korea's Defense Ministry in central Seoul by the end of this year. Park Ji-won, Arirang News, Pyeongtaek.
A group of South Koreans have returned from the north this afternoon after a 3-day trip to prepare for reunions that'll be held in August for families separated by the Korean War. They inspected the Mount Kumgang Resort, which will be the venue for the reunions, as agreed last Friday by both sides' Red Cross organizations. The team was led by Kim Byung-dae, who heads the Humanitarian Cooperation Bureau of South Korea's Unification Ministry. With him were 20 people, including staff from the South Korean Red Cross and technicians. They inspected the meeting rooms, hotels, rest areas, the fire station, and the electricity supplies. South Korea will start renovating those facilities in July or August. The top diplomats of South Korea and the U.S. spoke on the phone this morning to update each other on recent progress and to discuss strategies for North Korea's denuclearization and for creating a permanent peace on the Korean peninsula. This was their fourth discussion since the June 12th North Korea-U.S. summit. South Korea's Foreign Minister Kang Kyung-hwa explained the results of the recent Seoul-Moscow summit and progress in inter-Korean relations. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo explained Washington's plans in preparing for follow-up negotiations with Pyongyang. They agreed that now is a critical time in pushing for North Korea's denuclearization and promised to work together at both high levels and at the working level. A U.S. State Department report has listed North Korea as one of the world's worst human traffickers. And Secretary of State Mike Pompeo highlighted how the regime's citizens are subjected to forced labor overseas. Hong Yu reports.
North Korea has been listed among the worst countries in the world for human trafficking for the 16th year in a row this year. The regime was classified as a Tier 3 trafficker by the U.S. Department of State's 2018 Trafficking in Persons report, which was announced by U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on Thursday. North Korea has been classified as Tier 3, the worst of the three tiers on the report, ever since 2003. The report evaluates North Korea as a country that does not make efforts to prevent human trafficking and lacks even minimal regulations and standards to prevent it. When announcing the report, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo criticized other countries such as Libya, Myanmar, and Iran, but highlighted forced labor in North Korea.
We see the tragic examples of forced labor in North Korea as well. Untold number of North Korean citizens are subjected to forced labor overseas by their own government, in many cases with the tacit approval of host governments.
But compared to last year's report, in which then Secretary of State Rex Tillerson criticized North Korea for forcing its citizens to work overseas and then using their wages to fund its nuclear weapons program, Pompeo played down the comment as the U.S. is in the midst of seeking an agreement with Pyongyang to denuclearize the Korean peninsula. Hong Yu, Arirang News.
In other news, South Korea's main stock index briefly touched its lowest level in 13 months on Friday. In midday trading, the benchmark Kospi dropped below 2,300 points and briefly dipped as low as 2,296. But the Kospi rebounded, ultimately a gain for the day. It closed at 23.26, up 0.5% from the previous session. Analysts attributed the brief fall to the trade spat between China and the U.S., which investors see as having a direct effect on South Korea's trade with those two countries. Another main reason is an outflow of foreign capital that picked up after the U.S. Federal Reserve raised interest rates earlier this month. As for Korea's junior stock index, the KOSDAQ, it dipped by 5 points in the morning but recovered for a 1% gain. South Korea's overall industrial output went up in May from the previous month, a sign of a growing economy. But businesses are still pessimistic about the near future. Won Jung-hwan reports.
Industrial production in May increased by 0.3% from the previous month. According to data by Statistics Korea on Friday, South Korea's industrial output increased in May from a month earlier on the back of a rise in production in the automobile and telecommunications sectors. But retail sales fell for the second month in a row, dropping by 1% due to sluggish sales in the domestic automobile sector. The Equipment Investment Index in May also fell by 3.2% from the previous months and 4.1% from the same period last year. And businesses have a gloomy outlook for the near future. According to the Bank of Korea on Friday, South Korean manufacturing businesses' expectations for the upcoming months came to 80 on the Business Survey Index, up by 1 point from the figure for June. BSI is an indicator of the business conditions expected for the coming month, and a reading below 100 means the number of companies pessimistic about the business environment is larger than those with a positive outlook. The central bank said the U.S.-China trade dispute has affected business sentiment as South Korea depends highly on exports to the world's two largest economies. There is speculation that the country's exports of intermediary products to the U.S. and China will be hit by the fall in overall production of certain goods amid the escalating trade dispute between the two countries. 원정환, 아리랑 뉴스.
The South Korean national football team have returned home after their roller coaster of a World Cup campaign in Russia. They got a warm welcome Friday afternoon from the fans and reporters waiting for them at Incheon International Airport. Team Korea failed to move past the group rounds, having lost against Sweden and Mexico, but in the eyes of many, they won some redemption with a stunning 2-0 upset against defending champions Germany in the final match of Group F. Some of the players will get some much-needed rest before reporting back to their respective club teams, while others will prepare to join the under-23 team for the Asian Games in Jakarta in August. I'm Devin Whiting, and those are your news headlines for this hour.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo will reportedly fly over to Pyongyang next week. Despite it coming later than first expected, the Trump administration is hoping it can keep pressure on North Korea to speed up the denuclearization process. Cha Sang-mi reports.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo will reportedly visit North Korea next week, according to the Financial Times. Citing 4 unnamed U.S. officials, the newspaper on Thursday said Pompeo has canceled a planned July 6 meeting with his Indian counterpart in Washington in order to fly to Pyongyang. The officials added that the joint declaration signed by U.S. President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un on June 12th stipulated that Pompeo would hold follow-on talks with an unnamed senior North Korean official at the earliest possible date, but had given no timeline. The visit will be the first senior-level meeting between the two sides since the historic summit in Singapore. The U.S. State Department wouldn't confirm the Financial Times report. Pompeo traveled to North Korea twice before the Singapore summit, the most recent in May when he returned to the U.S. with 3 American hostages who had been detained in the North. The report comes after Pompeo testified to the Senate Appropriations Committee on Wednesday, where he stated that contacts with North Korea are ongoing, with him in charge of the communication. Pompeo said he was sure the regime knows the scope of denuclearization the Trump administration is calling for. He had also confirmed that no remains of U.S. soldiers killed during the Korean War have been handed over by the North, but said he was optimistic they will be in the not-too-distant future. Cha Sang-mi, Arirang News.
Now, joining us in the studio to give us his insights into the current situation with North Korea, we have Dr. Bong Young-sik from the Yonsei Institute for North Korean Studies. Welcome back, Professor Bong.
Pleased to be here again.
Now, reports are emerging today that Pompeo is finally going to Pyongyang next week to have follow-up talks with North Korea. It's taken a little longer than expected, seeing as the Trump administration had previously said that it would happen last week. Why do you think there has been this delay?
Well, there's no incentives for Pyongyang to rush the whole process. If there will be follow-on meeting between a senior official of the United States government, which is the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and his counterpart in North Korea, North Korean government has to show more genuine gestures and carry out concrete steps toward the denuclearization, which will undercut North Korea's bargaining chips vis-a-vis the United States. So it makes sense for North Korean regime to take as much time as possible by manipulating the joint statement outcome of the Singapore summit meeting between Kim Jong-un and Mr. Donald Trump of the United States, which it lacks details. So the main purpose of Mike Pompeo's visit to Pyongyang is to review the details of the what must have been agreed between the two leaders in the Singapore summit meeting. But you cannot really say that the United States and North Korea have just wasted the previous 2 weeks after the summit meeting on June 12th, because both leaders agreed in Singapore that the entrance of the process of denuclearization of North Korea would begin with building trust, eliminating the concern for hostile policy from either side. So in order to fulfill the first preconditions for moving the ball in the right direction, the United States decided to suspend joint military exercises with South Korea, starting with the Fall Eagle exercise scheduled this August, to show that the United States would not pose any hostile policy toward North Korea as long as North Korea does not engage in provocative actions or continue the development of the intercontinental ballistic missiles and the nuclear warheads. And in return, Pyongyang began the process of repatriate the remains of the fallen American soldiers during the Korean War as a sign of the building trust with the United States. The exact number has not been confirmed, but it has been reported that about 158 remains have been prepared to be sent back home to the United States by North Korea, and which fits nicely to the mantra of the armed forces of the United States, that no one is left behind. So not everything has been wasted or delayed.
Sure, so taking steps to build trust, I guess. But then what can we expect from these talks if Pompeo does actually go to North Korea next week? What can we realistically expect to come out of them?
It's like, analogously speaking, trying to tighten the bolts. As I said, that the joint statement notoriously lacks the details about the roadmap to be applied to both Pyongyang and Washington. Pyongyang wants a security guarantee and the economic opportunity to build national economy. And United States, of course, wants a CVID, complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization of North Korea. So both parties will work on making the spirit of the joint statement in details so that there will be concrete steps to be made by both sides. And for the United States, it is important to reap some kind of early harvest so that the president, the White House can demonstrate to the constituents and the politicians that the summit meeting with Kim Jong-un in Singapore was not a big failure. Progresses are being made.
So we're not sure who Pompeo is going to meet when he goes there, but I guess we have to watch out for who he is going to meet. It could be Kim Young-chul, who he's met with several times in Pyongyang and in New York as well. Well, there's a possibility, apparently, it could be Ri Yong-ho as well, the foreign minister. Does it depend on who? Do you think it matters who he talks to? Does it show? Could we read some signs into what North Korea intends to do by seeing who they put forward?
I personally wouldn't put too much emphasis on who Secretary Pompeo's counterpart will be, because what is most important is the strategic decision, which can be only made by the Supreme Leader, Mr. Kim Jong-un. So whether it will be Kim Young-chul again or Foreign Minister Ri Yong-ho, he will deliver the decision already made by his boss, Kim Jong-un. So what is more important is the content of the agreement, which will be made by Secretary Pompeo and his North Korean counterpart. But if it will be Ri Yong-ho, then it shows that that North Korea is going to use the previous agreements on North Korea's denuclearization, because foreign minister has been the main government branch during the era of the six-party talks. So if Ri Yong-ho will be the counterpart of the Secretary of the State, Mike Pompeo, then that can be read as a sign that North Korea is going to use at least part of the previous agreements on denuclearization.
Donald Trump said at a rally on Thursday that the North Korea denuclearization process cannot be rushed, and he compared it to cooking a turkey as such. But compared to previous comments, there's quite a step back, quite a turnaround in his thinking. It seems that way. Do you think it shows that he now finally understands that dealing with North Korea is tricky and it will take time?
I think he had already understood that denuclearization of North Korea was, using his own word, a huge challenge to the United States. So he realized, I think, that important decisions could not be really made in the summit meeting with Mr. Kim Jong-un in Singapore. And it seems like President Trump has realized that the United States possesses great deal of advantages because time is not really on the side of North Korea. The statement by President Trump and the Secretary Pompeo that we do not need to rush. We don't have any set timetable. We have to treat the denuclearization of North Korea like a turkey in the stove. Should not be interpreted as changing position of the Trump administration. Rather, it could be a very stern message to Pyongyang, kind of warning that as long as you will not make early concrete steps toward denuclearization as agreed in the summit meeting in Singapore, time is running out for you to turn to economic development. You have to give up at least part of your nuclear missile capabilities and facilities. Otherwise, all these existing economic sanctions, which make North Korean economy continuously bleed, will remain in place. So you have to make your decision early if you want to make important change you want.
Before we go, I wanted to talk about something else as well that's happening in South Korea. So the South Korean government has been holding talks with North Korea over various other kind of joint ventures, such as reconnecting rail and road networks. Both talks have ended with agreements to carry out surveys and such. What does this mean, and what kind of cooperation can North Korea and South Korea actually do in the short term, and especially considering that there are still economic sanctions on North Korea?
The answer to your question is directly related to our previous conversation on, dealing with North Korea's denuclearization is like, cooking turkey in the stove. Because as long as North Korea will not make concrete steps of denuclearization, economic sanctions will not be removed. As long as the economic sanctions will be in place, it is very limited for South Korean government or any other government to engage North Korea economically. Vice Minister of the National Unification made this point in his interview with a reporter that this is why we need to take kind of two tracks toward North Korea in terms of economic cooperation. We focus on what we can do, assuming the economic sanctions remain in place, like the joint surveys of the forest, right? Mining or railroad reconnection projects. But we also prepare for major projects with North Korea. But the precondition, absolute precondition is the UN Security Council resolutions which prohibits North Korea's exports and the joint ventures in operation inside North Korea have to be changed. So it is all up to North Korea's decision of denuclearization. Otherwise, then any economic projects with North Korea will continuously remain in a lowest level.
So exactly. So there is some criticism saying that North Korea hasn't shown any steps towards denuclearization yet, but these kind of talks and plans for projects eases pressure on North Korea. What would you say to those kind of criticisms?
Well, I mean, by dangling very substantial package of important economic benefits in front of North Korean leadership is very important. That is a part of the maximum pressure and maximum engagement strategy toward North Korea for the purpose of the denuclearization of North Korea. But it is up to Kim Jong-un regime to decide whether it is going to rely on provision of economic prosperity to its people instead of relying on nuclear weapons and missiles in order to guarantee its survival and security. North Korean government has already embarked upon massive construction of casino and five-star hotels in Wonsan, Galma area. But in order for the project to be complete, you need electricity, you need cement, you need to connect the railroads so that the outsider travelers will come and spend money inside that resort area. It is all hinged upon lifting economic sanctions in exchange for North Korea abandoning at least part of its nuclear missile capability. And Kim Jong-un has not really made that bold decision yet.
Well, thank you for keeping a watch on the situation in North Korea, and we appreciate your insights.
You're welcome.
That's it from myself. I'll be back next week with more opinions and analysis of the week's top stories. We do hope you can join us then. And in the meantime, hope you have a good weekend and stay tuned to Arirang for more of your news updates. Thank you for watching and goodbye.